wife's laughing at me for that statement.
Who are you?
And
You know who I am.
what's frustrating to me is to see people give new writers who want to be successful, who want to make money, who want to succeed, really bad advice like write what you love, don't worry about the market, or don't worry about the genre, or and to me, writing a good book encompasses all of these things, right? If you don't know who you're writing for when you start writing, you're writing for no one.
Troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest. Reaction in the system on fire. Military sound and science fiction contest. Short stories every Wednesday. Military sound and fiction contest.
All right, today we are talking about things that no one told you as an author, or that you would need to do as an author. We're kind of going into how the sausage is made a little bit, but we were just discussing how we could maybe tie this to MILSF, because there are definitely some specifics for this specific niche, but there's plenty of things, and the things have changed over time too, because depending on, all of us started writing a long time ago, when people were talking about like specific paths that you would need to take, or you got to get an agent, or you got to do X, Y, and Z. And then around 2014, 2016, the Kindle showed up, the Amazon store, indie publishing became a thing, and people that did well in indie publishing started their own publishing houses. And now you've got so-called indie publishers like Athon or Variant or other places like that outsell the publishers that used to be thought of as that was the gravy train, right? But was it ever the gravy train? So there's a lot to touch on here. And if you're not an author, it might just be interesting to hear the things that we're thinking about as well when you get into this. Is it a calling? Is it a hobby? Is it a torturous slavery that you can never let go of? I don't know.
Yes, James, I hate to rain on your parade and make you feel old, but the Kindle came out in 2007, buddy.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I remember when they first showed up at Target, they had the neat little push button things, or keyboards. All right, who wants to jump in first?
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you mentioned the Kindle and how things have changed. I mean, when I started, the meta was short, like novella stacks, and then you do an omnibus and put that out as a book, and you were almost guaranteed to have good sales. I mean, I think Hugh Howey was the one that kind of pioneered that, but then a lot of people kind of followed in his footsteps. And I mean, it used to be sell your book for 90, give it away for free, give book one away for free, and then sell it for 99 cents and do all of that. And none of that meta works anymore. And it's just like fundamentally has changed just how you do things as a business. I mean, that's how I started. I wrote a novella, and my plan was to write 5 novellas and then do the omnibus. And then book 2 was not a novella. Book 2 was way long, and then book 3 was way longer than that. And I failed miserably at that project. But I think one of the things that I found, at least recently, is unless you're super excited about the thing that you're wanting to write on, then don't write that thing. There's so many niche genres out there, like weird Western, or just smaller genres that aren't necessarily like massive markets, but they're still fun reads and the audience is still there. If that's what you want to do, is write a weird Western, then do that, and don't force yourself to do, I don't know, hardcore lit RPG progression isekai fantasy. If that's not your thing, don't do it. Because there's so many authors now that gets kind of stuck in writing something that they don't necessarily want to write just because that's what makes them money. And if you're looking to do it as a full-time author, obviously you're going to be doing it for a long time, and you want to be able to uh, carry that and not get burnt out in doing something, like write different series or whatever, different genres. I've written a couple of different genres. I like to spread it out and kind of enjoy the process. And that's, I think, the key is enjoying the process. And it took me a long time to figure mine out, and I'm still kind of tweaking it, but absolutely enjoying it is number one key.
And if you don't, this is one of the few careers, or well, I should say it's probably one of the only careers where your creativity, like there's a level of craft that goes into building the table, but you got to be creative. Like that's what makes you unique. And often that will be the gauge of what is success, right? Did you sell the thing to a publisher? And then that's what gauges if you have written a good thing or not, right? And if you, the thing is that a lot of people forget that a publisher is looking at a different set of metrics than you might be looking at as a writer coming up through whatever critique groups or things like that. They're not necessarily looking at the things the publisher was looking at. A publisher is looking at what's selling these days, what market can they hit, how much is it going to cost them to produce it. Are you a person who can produce consistently? Do you have a track record? If you don't enjoy doing that work, it's really, as soon as like you're, it's just going to be a miserable career for you. So that's a thing.
There's
that
much easier
people,
ways to make money for
there
sure.
are easier ways to make money. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't tell you, is that this is still a job. The work still has to be done and you need to enjoy it. You need to have a good time while you're doing it. Otherwise there are definitely easier ways to make money, or just decide that you don't want to make money. Like we live in a time now where you can publish without worrying as much about that profit motive or pleasing a publisher. And maybe you'll get a dedicated following of 100 people or whatever, but that's still 100 people that never would have seen what you wrote before. And the thing is, like, even saying 100, like the way Amazon works, it's going to be thousands. They may, you know may not like what you wrote. You got to have thick skin. That's probably another thing we should talk about. But you don't have to necessarily, make money. You don't have to meet those metrics if you don't want to. But if you do want to make this a career, that's a thing you have to think about. You got to think about audience and think about what's selling. So, Jeff, you got anything to add to it?
Well, I mean, not really. You guys did a great cover your bases on those. No one tells you, no one's going to tell you to make money or not to make money. That's just entirely on you to decide what you want out of your writing career. I always come in from a perspective of you want to make money because you're investing your entire heart and soul into these books and you want some return for it. And I know a lot of people say, oh, I just want people to read it. That's great, but that comes with making money. There aren't a lot of books that get read that don't make money. So it's important to remember that while you may not be interested in the money, most people are interested in someone reading their books. And that is my son destroying the living room. Sure. My thing is, one of the things that I always, that no one, it was difficult for me to discover is no one in this business is going to tell you you suck. You probably do. 90% of everything is trash, but no one's going to tell you that. They'll give you marketing advice. They'll give you business advice. They'll give you all kinds of advice, especially advice you didn't ask for. But nobody in this business is going to read your book and tell you you suck. So it is on you to get better. It's on you to be better at your craft. And you can't rely on anybody else, not editors, not anybody else to tell you, like, hey, you need to improve or this needs to be better or whatever. And you have to be willing to hear that, because most people come into this business and they're just like, oh, I'm a special snowflake and my book is great and it's just what the world needs. And if it doesn't sell, it's because of Amazon or whatever. And I often, people will be like, my book's not selling, and I'll go look at it and the writing is terrible. And well, maybe that's not exactly the reason it's not selling. It's certainly not helping. But you can't tell that to anybody because they'll freak out.
Well, and even saying like, what does terrible mean? It's not clear. It's overly wordy. It doesn't get to the story. It doesn't have strong characters. Like, think of it all, like the information is out there for you. And if people won't tell you that, that's what you got to look at. And that's when we say terrible, that's what I mean. Like a thing that sucks the reader in, gives them somebody to like and to follow a story with that they're having a good time on.
See, I was going to say that uh, uh, but you're partially, I don't want to say you're partially incorrect, because there's a lot of people that will tell you your book sucks. Whether it's the readers or the publishers that don't want it or whatever it is, but there's not a lot of people that will tell you why your book sucks. And there's not a lot of people qualified to tell you why your book sucks, because some people will say, it's the description, or some people will say it's the dialogue, or some people will say it's just whatever the writing is. um it it's not very often that you can get clear, good advice from a reliable source on why your book is not selling, or what you need to do to improve on your author. So maybe this can kind of go into one of James's uh points, was networking. Because if you're wanting to improve as an author, networking with the authors that are networking with the wrong type of author could definitely be detrimental to your career. And what I mean by that is, either A, like Jeff said, they're just going to tell you your writing is awesome when it's not, or B, they're just going to tell you that it sucks and not why. But if you can get a peer group of authors that can give you clear, effective feedback, then that will definitely improve your skills as an author, and then make your books better as you grow. I mean, I still write bad, and I I still have sequences and scenes in my books where people read and they're like, I don't understand what's happening here, because I see it in my head and I write it in the page, but I'm not the person reading it, having no context on the words that they're reading. They've got to be able to translate that for their own. And if I don't do a good enough job as the author to allow them to do that translation, then my writing is bad, right? So having a good kind of network of peers um, that you trust is, I think, really key. And if you are receiving negative feedback, then definitely take it to the next step and go, why is it bad, and what can I do to improve it? Because there's always things you're going to be able to improve on as an author. You're never going to be the best author in the world. You're never going to be the best at anything. I think I do really good at dialogue, and I do really good at story, but some of my narrative description lacks. Sometimes I write a little word heavy.
You're
And
like the
you
word
get some.
valor.
I do like the word valor. Yes, that's true. Uh,
Well, what I
but
mean
yeah,
though
I
is
mean,
just like when you get into like a public peer group like Writer Dojo or something, like nobody's ever going to say, like nobody's publicly ever going to say your writing is bad. Most
for sure.
authors don't have time to read somebody else's book anyways, because
Right.
we're too busy writing. And even if they did give you feedback, odds are it's going to be the wrong kind of feedback, because
Mm,
it's really easy to find. It's really easy to say, I think this book sucks, or I think this book is terrible, or I think this book is great. And it's also really easy to say why you think that, but why you think that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what that is. Because a lot of times there's an underlying problem with a story that people can't identify. So they don't know why they don't like it. So they just grasp at something obvious, like, oh, I didn't like this character. When in reality, it wasn't that they didn't like the character, it's that the character didn't have any motivation.
Right.
Or I didn't like the ending. When in reality, what they really mean is the ending wasn't satisfying, stuff like that. So it's really on you as an author to figure a lot of this stuff out and know your weaknesses and know yourself and be willing to improve. And it's just not something anybody's ever going to tell you, because most people come into this business thinking they're already the best author in the world and nobody can tell them otherwise. And you have to realize that you're just not. If
And I
your
want to,
first book is your best book, you've failed.
yeah, I want to come back to networking because there's another piece. There's kind of two things I wanted to talk about, like types of author groups, like initial ones like the Writer Dojo versus, you know, groups of working authors. We can come back to that. But I wanted to say that having it coming back to like what Jeff was just saying about reviews and having a thick skin, really, like a lot of people will publish, they run into their reviews and they're like, oh God, people hate me. But this is a time like talking about that unvarnished feedback that you would never get otherwise. We live in a time where you get it, and you can't look at reviews as like personal attacks. You got to look at them
yeah.
as, because people will tell you what, even though they don't quite know what they're saying, they'll say it. Like, I didn't like the ending, or I didn't understand this part, or this part, so you have to look through that to, okay, my character lacked, just like Jeff was saying, my character was lacked motivation. Josh says, I know I need to work on these pieces. You can see the things people liked, moved quickly, but I didn't like the ending or whatever. And then that gives you that unvarnished feedback to think about, not take it to heart in a detached way, but then that's where you're going to get that feedback that no one else will give you, because these are the people that paid for the thing, and they're giving you the actual feedback that they're, when they finish it, so that's a thing that nobody ever had access to before, that is really kind of a gift these days. I wish actually they could still have like responses to feedback. Like, I didn't find it super useful when authors did it, but I liked it when readers would argue about, with each
Yeah.
other about feedback, because then you could see, like, okay, one person gets up there and gives their opinion, but then you get 10 other people who are like, no, it was fine. And it's kind of like that beta reader thing you're getting, that if you wouldn't have had it from a group of other readers, at least you can see it on Amazon.
Yeah,
So
you got to
that's,
think long and hard as an author before you respond to a review.
yeah,
Rule of thumb for me is don't ever do it, but
right.
Well, and on the topic of reviews, I usually kind of operate at a baseline of averages, and I usually throw out all of the 1 stars, and most of the time I throw out all the 5 stars, most of the time. And then I look at the middle, and I see if there is it's kind of like a free or a beta reader group that you're paying, and you look at those mid-tier reviews, and do they have a consistent theme of like, this was incorrect, or this was wrong, or whatever. If it's just a 1 star that says your writing is horrible, you can immediately throw that out. It doesn't matter. If it's a 5 star review that says this is the best book ever, you can immediately throw that out. Like, you don't need to pay attention to any of that stuff. I just look at the actual feedback, and then you just have to judge its merits and say, does it warrant a harder look, or is this just a person that didn't like this specific thing? And you know uh it's really easy to go on Amazon and look at the bestsellers and look at all the 5 star reviews, and they all say you're the best author in the world. But even George R. R. Martin has 1 star reviews where somebody says your book is horrible. And so that, I mean, that's, to me, that's not a career killer. That shouldn't be a motivational killer. Just immediately disregard that. Like, it's absolutely not worth your time or effort to even think about. But if you see, an average of reviews that say your dialogue was stilted, or your characters were kind of cardboard cutouts and they didn't really have any emotion or any kind of motivational inspirational actions or anything like that, then you can kind of look at that and go, okay, what do I need to do to improve on that? Because I
Right.
felt like they did. I could understand their motivations, but maybe you didn't do a good enough job translating that in the words to show the reader that this is what they're motivated by, or this is what it is. Um,
And
I
the
try to
quality of
do.
the review. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think the quality of the review, like you just said there, you can tell which ones have more value to look at. Somebody that
Yeah.
really did think about that and had their actual reasoning, can be useful. So that's, but I think what you're saying there is very important, to look at the average of the reviews. People people just can't articulate sometimes why they didn't like something, and it's difficult to really figure that out. So when you do get it, I try and think of it as a gift, right? Like, that's not a thing I would have gotten otherwise. So even if they said they didn't like it, it's still it can be useful feedback, so don't get, but you're gonna get feedback. I think that's the biggest kind of, if we were going to distill this into something people don't tell you, is we live in a time where everybody's going to give their opinion. They have a means to give their opinion. And so you're going to get that. And if your writers group or wherever you came from is, always tries to be positive, which is great to get people to finish things, but you're going to get negative feedback. So just get ready for it, and whatever, give
Honestly,
yourself
I
a
think
cookie.
that negative feedback is really the only kind of feedback that has any kind of um merit in terms of improving as an author. Because if somebody tells you this is great, that doesn't help you.
No.
It doesn't do anything but inflate your ego. It doesn't help you in any kind of like functional way. But if someone says this is bad because of this, then that's negative criticism that you can take and go, okay, do I need to work on that? Or was that just something that they, didn't like at the time? A great example of that is I'm doing my second read through of the first Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, and Joe Abercrombie is a phenomenal writer. His characters are like some of the best character portraits I've ever read in any books, regardless of genre. His dialogue is on point. His inner dialogue is on point. But the first time I read it, I was reading for plot. And I read the first trilogy and could not stand it. Absolutely hated it. And I don't typically post reviews or anything like that. And this time I didn't, but I did tell people, in person or on the phone or whatever, my friends, "Oh, man, I hated this book. It didn't end, like there was nothing going on, blah, 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 blah." But I was approaching it from a plot standpoint and I was reading it for that. And then after I finished the rest of the books in that universe, about halfway through that read through, I realized that Joe Abercrombie is not a plot writer, he's a character writer. And so now I'm going back through and rereading the first trilogy with that in mind, not trying to pick apart the plot, but following the characters because the characters are so good. And now I absolutely love the series. And now, like even the second read through, I'm realizing that either I missed or just forgot a lot of the key points that were in the story, that there was more plot than I originally thought. um but I mean, a lot of times those negative reviews can be weighted and biased because of their expectations going into your project. So if you're writing a character driven story and they go into your story expecting a plot driven story, they're not going to like it. They're going to be expecting more plot. So if their review is this didn't have any plot, but you weren't writing for that specifically, then you can throw that out. If you were writing for plot and they say this didn't have any plot, then maybe you need to take a second look and go, did I actually do what I was trying to do? Um, I mean, it's so like it's so subjective in terms of anything, and entertainment in and of itself is subjective, and so it's really sometimes it's difficult to parse down good and bad advice in reviews, but they are a good metric if you just take it as that.
Right.
I when I first started publishing, I got some good reviews and then I got some bad reviews, and some of the bad reviews kind of stung a little bit. But after doing it so long that now I don't even really care about the bad reviews unless they are key to what I'm trying to do. I mean, you get a lot of reviews of like the editing in this book sucked or whatever it is, right? Like that's objective. Like you can look at that and go, did I misplace a comma here? Do I misspell a word here? But that doesn't really have any bearing on your skill as an author, unless you really don't have any grasp on the language that you're writing. But I'm hoping that you
Well,
do, since you love
sometimes you get an
writing.
editor that wants to go comma crazy and add a whole bunch of stuff to your book. And
Yeah,
The
true.
commas. One thing I didn't know going into this business is that you talk to 5 different editors and they'll have 5 different opinions on where commas go.
Yeah.
And even the CMOS is super subjective on comma placement. I've had editors who
Chicago manual
just
style.
Chicago manual style, just shot a shotgun full of commas at my manuscript. And I'm like, I know I'm not the best with grammar, but I'm pretty sure you don't put commas everywhere in every sentence all the time, And then I have another my personal
Not
editor,
unless you're James Kirk.
yeah. Well, my personal editor, the one I use the most, is he's very light-handed on commas. He's like, I'd rather not use them if not possible, because for him the purpose of grammar is clarity, and if the sentence is clear, and there's no need for a comma. But you have like editors who are super strict on the Chicago manual of style, and if the sentence structure demands a comma, they'll put it there whether it makes sense or not. And it's one of those, again, that's one of those things that people just don't tell you, is that the editing of your manuscript is super subjective based on the editor you have.
Yeah.
That is very true.
That's another piece, I guess, when it comes to having a thick skin, is that other people are going to touch your work, which may not be the biggest thing that I would tell that people don't tell you. I think if you worked in any project in any professional setting, um, other people are going to touch your work, and you got to decide where the line is on what you accept and don't accept, and what, but that's going to happen. So you're going to have to talk to other people and defend your decisions on why you chose to do something. I mean, I was listening to an interview with Donald Glover recently, and he said something that kind of struck me. He's like, at this point in my career, I know how to make decisions about my art. And that kind of was like, huh, that's an interesting way to think about being a professional. Like, you know how to make decisions, you know why you did something, why you didn't do something.
Right.
And I think being able to defend that is what gets you to that next professional step.
100%.
Yeah. Um, the next thing I want to go back to the networking, and I think talking to other writers is absolutely important, but also recognizing where kind of what level you're at. And we're in a time now where, okay, I can sign up for Facebook, I can get on Discord, I can go to other places where writers are gathering. Although, it used to be, I think that was easier. It's getting a little harder. Like Discord is more of a walled garden. I don't even know how you would do it on some other social medias. I know people used to do it on Twitter or X, but I never really got into that. Facebook feels like there just aren't a lot of people on Facebook anymore. But there's always going to be kind of the bar with an open entry, right? Anybody can walk in and talk, and some people will give you good advice. Some people might hang out that know, like Jeff is a saint who tries to give advice, and then you get people that, wow, don't like disagree or whatever. And if you got the patience for that, I don't. But then there's going to be the back room, right, where people are playing poker, and we've been playing poker for a while. We know how to be successful at it. If we invite you into that game, that's kind of the place you want to be. And you get there by being a person people, maybe don't agree with, but get along with. You've got something to contribute. You're taking this seriously. And you want to be successful in the way that, whatever, like we've talked about, success means to you. But that's really where you kind of want to get to, like hanging out in these groups where, like, there are some things where somebody will show up and be like, I sold a million books doing this. And if they can really, that's something we've talked a lot about, is like some people may think they understand why they sold a lot of books in this new market, but it can often be very difficult to figure out what they really did, which,
Yeah.
the things that we've talked about before, consistency, knowing your audience, you know, writing, great characters, things like that, that's going to get you there. But my point here is getting to that, networking with that group of people that are doing what you would like to do, and that you can meaningfully contribute, is really kind of the next best place to be. Because the point I wanted to make that nobody ever told me about networking, especially, is you got to network. And most of the work, like the contracts that I've gotten, the publication, like I've gotten publication through the slush pile, but it takes a hell of a lot longer to get there. You're going to be spending a lot of time waiting, tying up something that could have been published somewhere else. But going to the places where publishers are, where editors are, where other writers are, because a lot of times, like, your entry into an anthology or an intro to a publisher is going to come through another writer who's like, yeah, I know this person, I know they can do, good work, talk to this person. That's where most of my opportunities have come from. And if I hadn't really made an effort to get to know people, or made an effort to reach out to somebody, or just say, hey, I really liked your book, and start a conversation, um, that's where a lot of opportunity has come from, at least for me. Like, the slush pile will get you places, but it takes a hell of a long time, and I just don't have a lot of time. So that's one
You
big
know,
thing
I recently got told by a major publisher that the slush pile is not an entry.
yeah.
That that
And maybe it's not anymore,
the slush pile is there basically just to weed out, to give people a place to send their manuscripts, but they're never going to make it to the slush pile, and they're never going to get published to the slush pile. And that blew me away,
Yeah.
because it's like, that's the thing that everybody believes, right? Oh, I'll send my manuscript in a year, somebody will have read it, they'll get back to me. And I don't know how true it is for every major publisher, but this is one of the, in the top, 6 or 7 publishers. And they basically said that nobody, no, and he was speaking for all the publishers, but because he's in that business, it was that nobody reads the slush pile anymore. You have to be just extraordinarily, just like a once in a generation author, and get incredibly lucky that somebody actually read it who enjoys that kind of book. And then maybe they'll look at it. But most publishers, what they're doing right now is they're getting their books from authors who know authors. They're getting
Right.
their books from people who they've heard of or people who they've actually met in person, not, random submissions, which, sucks for a lot of people because a lot of people do that.
And
One
if
of the
you're,
things I was gonna
I was just to say,
um,
if you're not an extrovert, it's tough. So, but go ahead, Josh.
one of the things I was going to say about the networking aspect of authors, and it's something that no one necessarily didn't tell me, but it took me a long time to kind of figure out, is that um, to build any kind of like good network, it takes time and it's not going to happen overnight. And that the the people that you network with one year may not be the people that you network with the next year. And it's very kind of, I wouldn't say fluid, but um, I started a podcast called Keystroke Medium like 10 years ago. And it didn't take off. It didn't explode into anything, but it did become a very cool thing for several hundred people, several thousand people that
When
listened.
you say it didn't take
Um,
off, I want to point out that you had Ari Salvatore on your podcast.
that is true. That is true. I mean, we did have a lot of big names, but it
Yep.
wasn't like it wasn't like a huge success. And really, it was because Scott and I were nobodies when we started it. But my point was that it took us a really long time to meet people that we felt like we wanted to heavily network with instead of just having acquaintances and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I've been in this business for, I don't know, 12, 14 years or something now, and most of the people that I started networking with, I don't talk to anymore at all. And most of the people I talk with, I developed friendships over the number of 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And they became more than just network opportunities. They became friends, and that was important to me. Um, but that kind of dovetails into my next point where um, a lot of people have the question of, how do I how do I sell books, or how do I become a number one best-selling author? And my easy answer is you've got to grind for a certain number of years. You've got a lot of a lot of people that are making it big today started working 15, 20 years ago, and started writing 15, 20 years ago, and started
Rick's
honing their
always fond of
skills.
saying that he's an overnight success, 10 years in the making.
Right.
100%. Yeah. And, uh, most of the big names that you see, they, seven figure, multi-million dollar authors, they didn't start out that way. Those are the people that sold one book and then ballooned into an empire is very, I mean, it's not even a fraction of percent. The only person that I can think off the top of my head that did that was J.K. Rowling. And that was a fluke. Like, it's absolutely a fluke.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, like Hugh Howey did too, but if we're talking about people who are still writing, neither one of them write anymore.
Well, but Hugh Howey grinded for several years
Well, he
before
worked in a
Wool
bookstore,
came
but I
out.
mean, Wool was like,
Yeah,
Wool,
but that wasn't his first book. He had written dozens of books before Wool came out,
well, what I
and
mean is
Wool
like he hit it big and then he kind of instantly got out of writing.
I mean, that is true. Yes, that is
So,
true. I was meaning to say, like, you're never gonna just write one book and then have it explode and do a bazillion dollars.
Well,
I'm not sure
Um,
you want to
I was
have
going
that.
to say
no,
there's kind of a trope in publishing. Like they always want to say, "Is this your first book?" And then so many people will have that book. Like one, I'm blanking on the author's name right now, but he wrote the book "Bringing Out the Dead" that the Nicolas Cage movie was based on. He was an EMT, and he wrote that one book, sold it as a movie. It was a great book. I mean, unfortunately, I think he passed is actually the story, but he still had a few years. Like he had one more book, and then he never got another contract. And
Mhm.
that's part of the grinding is better if you because then
Yeah,
you set a precedent that if you don't develop the habits of being able to write consistently and produce more work and come up with stories and characters, and you kind of blow your wad in the beginning, it's pretty difficult to continue because you don't learn the skills that it takes to be
yeah.
consistently successful. And the
100%. Or
market
you do
loves
have that major success and then you can't duplicate it with anything
right.
else. Um,
And you end up
these are
thinking
bad
it's something
examples,
other
but you
than
have
you.
like you have like an Ernie Howard with Ready Player One, or Andy Weir with The Martian. Now Andy Weir, he's got a couple other good books that are good in and of themselves, but there's no way that you could duplicate The Martian. There's no
Yeah.
way that you can duplicate
Can't
Ready
even
Player One.
plan for The Martian. Martian's not a book you can plan for. You know what I mean?
Do you know? Do you know the awesome story behind what happened with the Martian? He didn't even want to publish it on
Yeah,
Amazon.
he only did it
He
so
w-
it'd be easier to get to people.
he wrote it on his website, and he wrote it in chapters, and people were like, I want to read this book in its entirety somewhere. And so he put it on Amazon for like 99 cents or free or something like that, but he didn't even want to. And then it just ballooned into a thing. And that's crazy. I mean, it's awesome for any author to be able to have that success.
Yeah, I remember reading
Um,
an article about him, and he was saying that he had a day where he was on one phone call with a publisher who was offering him 7 figures to publish it, and the other phone was Ridley Scott wanting to make it into a movie.
yeah, that's
And
awesome.
he's like, that was pretty surreal.
I think kind of something that also tells onto that is um, the uh, good books can sell really badly, and then bad books can sell really well. And so just because there's a huge success of whatever book it is, doesn't necessarily mean that you should try to write that, right? Like, for instance, I think the easiest example of this is 50 Shades of Grey, where the book, it in and of itself, the writing of the book, the story was just blasé, but the writing was not very good at all. And it sold a bazillion copies, and it spawned some movies, and everybody tried to duplicate it or whatever. But that's just one example of in my opinion, a book that was not very good that just ballooned into something else. But then you have like
Well, I'm pretty
really,
sure
really,
if Kim Kardashian took a picture of her reading Valor in her bathtub, it would
for sure, like I'd take that. I'd take that.
And
But
that's
like then you have, this is a good example of Black Badge. Steve and Rhett's Weird Western. It's an amazing book, an amazing book. Same with Make Me No Grave. It's Haley Stone. They're both weird westerns. They're both amazing books. They're well written. They're phenomenally narrated, and they didn't balloon into anything major. And but that doesn't necessarily mean that those books were a failure or that they were bad. They just didn't, either the audience was too small or they didn't
I mean, it's
have
weird
the
Western.
push.
We know the audience is too small.
Well, but yes, that's true. But there's a lot of like mainstream, like everybody says, oh, I don't want to read science fiction, but almost every mainstream billion-dollar blockbuster hit is science fiction. Like
right.
it's crazy that everybody's like, I don't like science fiction, but they love the Avengers and they loved Avatar and like all these aliens and all this stuff. Like, so like I guess my point with that is, if you do get in the business and you write objectively a good book and it doesn't sell, don't take that as a failure. Continue grinding, because that's where it is. It's not like like I have this thing with tattoos where I like having tattoos, but I don't like getting tattoos. If you like having a book, but you don't like writing the book, do something else.
Right. Which is, I
You
think,
know what
gets
I
to a
mean?
point. One point I wanted to bring up that no one else will tell you is like, it's not about the book you just finished. It's about the next. You got to always moving on to the next book that you're
For
writing.
sure.
Like you got to write another book, and that's which goes back to what Josh said previously. If you don't enjoy doing this, there are easier ways to make money.
Mhm.
But the minute that's the best marketing you can do is to write another book. It's the best. It's how show that you're consistent and can be depended on, and it's just write the next thing, write the next thing.
And you're gonna
Love
get
the act of writing.
so much bad advice as a writer. I mean, that's kind of a thing that no one tells you either. You're gonna get so much bad advice from people who act like they know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
I mean, you go into Writer Dojo, I could spend all day in Writer Dojo debunking bad advice. And there have been days where I've had to, burr up my hair, and I've done that. And people get really offended and really mad, like, well, who are you? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, just go Google me and you'll see who I am. I know what I'm talking about. And it's frustrating to me is that like people talk about, my wife's laughing at me over that statement.
Who are you?
And
You know who I am.
what's frustrating to me is to see people give new writers who want to be successful, who want to make money, who want to succeed. Really bad advice, like write what you love, don't worry about the market, or don't worry about the genre, or and to me, writing a good book encompasses all of these things, right? If you don't know who you're writing for when you start writing, you're writing for no one. The company that makes Helldivers 2, which is one of the best games that came out this year, probably one of the best games that came out in the last 5 years, said a game for everyone is a game for no one. It's on their wall at their corporate headquarters. And it's absolutely true. There's no such thing as a book for everyone. But you will have writers who will tell you this constantly. Like, oh, you can do it. You can write whatever. And don't worry about genre. And don't worry about markets. And don't worry about covers. Just write what you love. Well, somewhere in where you love is also a book that will make money.
For sure.
And you've got to focus on that if success is your goal. If you just want to write, then write. And if you just want to publish, then publish. Why are you even watching this podcast? But when you hear, like, for me, whenever I'm talking about how to be a writer and how to succeed in this business, that's what I'm talking about. And of course, the first thing anybody says is like, well, what if they don't want to be a successful writer? Well, then don't listen to me.
Right.
I think one of the things that I don't know if anybody actually necessarily told me this or didn't tell me this, but one that something that I've come to know is true, is regardless of what you want to write, let's just say you want to write MIL sci-fi, read MIL sci-fi, but also read everything else. Read thrillers, read fantasy, read mysteries, read those type of things. They might not necessarily be the genre that you're interested in writing, but each one of those genres does something better than the other genre does, typically speaking. And I don't want to throw out like this does better in here because, again, it's subjective, but there are, in my opinion, more fantasy books that will allow you to learn your skills as in character more than there are in sci-fi, because sci-fi, typically speaking, is more plot driven than character driven. There are character driven sci-fi books, but in my experience, if you're trying to learn about character, fantasy is a good place to kind of get a good picture into that. If you're trying to get into suspense or action, read thrillers. That's a really good window into that aspect of writing. A lot of thrillers do that really, really well. If you're wanting to learn about tech and aliens and all that, then definitely read sci-fi. But if you're really wanting to grow your overall skills as an author and like feed that toolbox, as it were, reading in different genres will allow you to build that. And maybe you won't be an expert at everything, but if you get a little bit of taste of character, a little bit of story here, some wild, I tell everybody to read Peter F. Hamilton. If you're going to write anything sci-fi, read Peter F. Hamilton, because he is the king of weird far future alien technology, all of that.
Epic,
he does that super duper well. Like, some of his characters are meh, but overall, if you want to dip your toe into sci-fi or you want interesting things to think about, read Peter F. Hamilton. If you want to get better at action and suspense, read Mark Greaney. If you want to get better at characters, read Joe Abercrombie. If you want to get better at plot, read Brandon Sanderson. There's so many things that you can, so many different authors that do different things well. Limiting yourself to just reading one genre will hinder you in the long run.
Because another thing well, I was just say another thing that people won't tell you is that readers want the same but different. And so reading in other genres, like Josh is suggesting, gives you that little bit of difference, and then you can tweak a formula that's working. I mean, we've got a running gag in a friend group about how many Starship books are coming out now, because Terry Maggart has Starship. Right. So you got, like, my buddy gave me a Starship. I don't want to bag on that author because I don't know him, but don't do that necessarily. But doing a thing, looking at why a formula is successful, reading widely, and taking from other places to make your thing unique, is a great skill to have. And that's something nobody will tell you too, is like being a unique snowflake isn't always going to net you success. So sorry, Jeff.
When I was getting ready to write book 4, which is probably one of my more popular books, for Grimm's War, is half the book is follows Nadia in a very much a spy thriller esque book. Yeah, it's no sci-fi and there's technology and it's on another planet. But before I wrote that book, I went and read a couple of spy thrillers, The Fifth Estate and a few others. I read the one that got made in a movie with Chris Pratt, TV show with Chris Pratt.
Oh, Terminal
The
List.
Terminal List.
Yeah, Terminal List and a couple others. And there is a lot to learn from and when you want an aspect of something in your book, in your whatever series genre it might be. There's a lot to learn from other authors. I was not the best at characters when I first started, and so I went and not just characters, but like how you display emotions with characters. And spoiler alert, it's not they clenched their fist in anger. Um, and
Versus.
and one of the things I did was I read a couple of books by romance authors and looked at how they did emotions. And so there's a lot to learn from other authors. I know I'm not the biggest fan of Brandon Sanderson until I read Way of Kings, and then I spent the entire book going, "Why is he so good? Dang it!" Because it's his opus. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to learn from other authors, but you have to read deliberately. One of the downsides of being an author is you kind of stop reading for fun, and you start reading because you're trying to learn something. And that's I guess that goes on a list of things that people don't tell you. You no longer get to read for fun. Now reading is part of your job.
Well, reading in
and the
another
other thing
genre can help that though a little bit.
Right. And the other thing about reading after you become an author is it's like it's like me watching a cop show. Like you see everything that they did wrong, and even as a writer, you're watching a show and you're like, they did that element horribly. They could have written it better. And I try not to do the same thing when I read books, because I'll read a book and I'll read a sentence and I'll say, that's not how I write the sentence. But it's one of those things that you've got to like be aware of that you do, and you can just bypass it, and like even just store that in the back of your mind. And you read this patch, you're like, I would have read it differently. Well, then incorporate that into your writing and learn from it that way. But yeah, turning off your writer brain while you're reading, like James said, if you're writing, for instance, if you're writing sci-fi, if you're in the middle of writing a sci-fi book, I would highly recommend not reading science fiction. Read something else. Read a different genre, because I've come across this several times. And actually, in my first sci-fi book I ever read or wrote, I had these rank structure that I thought was really unique. And then I reread Honor Harrington and realized I had stolen it completely from David Weber. And I was like, I didn't even realize that I did that,
Yeah.
because I had like the Admiral of the Red or the Admiral of the Green or whatever it is. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll use that. And then I reread Honor Harrington. I was like, oh, I stole that. That's my bad. I won't put that in there.
Technically, you stole it from the British Navy because that's the British Navy. But
No, well, okay. Yeah, that works too. But
he
in
didn't
my
do it.
mind, I had stolen it from him. So
Yeah. One thing I learned, I was in a writer's group for a while with a woman that wrote like women's fiction and romance. And the way she would read was very interesting to me, because if I had two characters, especially like, a man and a woman, or people that could be romantically involved, that was the question she always wanted answered. Like, are they going to do it or not? Like, I would need to know that as soon as you introduce these characters, are they going to get it on? And I'm like, I'm not even thinking about that. Like, that's not like, I'm thinking about the plot and the tech and the blah, blah, blah. And she's like, no, 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 no. I want to know what emotions they're bringing, which I still think about that quite often. And it's something I learned from, working with a romance writer. So, okay. Well, I think is there any other thing we wanted to touch on? And I wasn't writing these down as we went. Can anybody remember to say what, if we were going to recap? But first, is there anything else
I don't
that
know.
anybody wanted to
The
share?
the only other thing that I can say, and this is definitely not something that somebody told me specifically, but it's if you're especially in our genre, if you're writing mill sci-fi, there's a lot of resources out there, and I think I've mentioned this before on the show, that you can do research on to gain a better knowledge of just everything in general when it comes to military sci-fi books. But there's some really, really good podcasts out there. I mean, nonfiction is a really good way to start if you're looking for plot or you're looking for character or that kind of thing. Nonfiction is a good place to start. But there's a lot of good podcasts out there also that you can watch for long form interviews, where you can not only hear what they have to say, and get the information of whatever they're talking about, but you can also see very real, very specifically their emotional reaction to telling the story, and then you can kind of see and glean what they were feeling, and sometimes they'll tell you what they were feeling in this particular instance, and a lot of that information is really good to have when you're building out your story and when you're telling it,
We're in
because
kind of a
you
golden
have
age of getting that stuff firsthand.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. A really good podcast that I like to watch is the Sean Ryan show. He has a lot of special operators, a lot of contractors, a lot of officers, high level officers, politicians, that kind of thing. They're long form interviews. He asks really good questions, and then he gives the guests the opportunity to speak. But there's a whole bunch of other podcasts out there that are really good at that. And like you say, you don't normally have time to read for fun. I don't normally have time to sit down and read a whole nonfiction book about something, but podcasts are a really good source of information.
Mhm. The last thing I wanted to mention was that we are what people often won't tell you, and we kind of touched on it, where people would tell you what worked for them, but we are in a time of constant change when it comes to
Mm.
publishing. What is a path to, success, like we've been talking about? What is a successful platform? What does it mean to be a successful author? Or we've debated about author versus content creator, what those two words mean. But you have to keep an open mind, because what may have worked last year is not going to work this year. What may be a path to finding an audience is going to be different than what it was even last year. And even what is publishing and how people read books and where they read books, all those things are in flux and changing, and sometimes stay the same, but I think it's really important to keep an open mind about those things. And anybody that tries to tell you an absolute, it's hard to find a lot of absolutes. I mean, there's certain absolutes, and I think the things Jeff has touched on are, be consistent, find your audience, write great characters, love what you do, but also be
Your
ready to
butt off.
work your butt off, but be flexible and network. I think you got to reach out and talk to other people, and that's where opportunities are going to come from for you. So don't be a jerk too.
Yeah, I think that ties into, we talked about, I think on one of our first episodes. I don't even know if it's out yet, but we talked about it, about going to writer cons or conventions and
it was the
stuff like
first one,
that.
yeah.
And I mean, that going into the conversation, don't go into a conversation when you're networking or any kind of situation where you're trying to build a group of people around you to grow. Don't go into it um with the what can they do for me, and if they can't do anything for me, then they aren't worth their time. Just honestly, like you said before, have an open mind about it, but um don't do like what Jeff said. Don't go and start being a know-it-all everywhere, but also don't go into the situation just looking to have everybody hold your hand and walk you through it and stuff like that. It's just like building a regular friendship. You're building that relationship so that you can improve. Um, and I think a lot of people, especially right now when everybody's kind of pushing to be the next best-selling author or the next seven-figure author or
Huge
whatever,
for me.
they're literally looking at all of their relationships in almost like a business transaction sense.
Right.
You got to be genuine.
And
You got to be genuine.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That little bit of Hollywood that sneaks out where you go to any party and everybody's like, where are you in the pecking order and what you do for me? Right. It drives me
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah.
So,
For sure.
yep.
Unless
All
you're
right.
in with Larry, in which case you know who all is at the top of the pecking order.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. The pecking order changes. Like you could be hot this year and then next year it could change. So
Yeah.
don't be a jerk.
Samuel L. Jackson said the toes you step on today might be connected to the butt you have to kiss tomorrow. So
Right.
Oh, that's a great line.
yeah,
Yep.
I always like that. All right, folks, I think that's where we need to wrap it
Okay.
up.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us. And
Please reach out on our Discord if you have any questions, or if you have some stuff you want to add, or if you think that maybe we screwed up on something, or if you just hate us.
if you love us, come tell us how much you love us.
If you hate Rick, come and tell us how much you hate.
I know,
Rick.
now's
He's
your
not here to
chance.
defend himself. So
Rick's not here. You're safe. Make all the
No,
comments
yeah.
about Rick.
You got chasing wildlife.
Right.
So now's your chance. So, all right. We'll see y'all later. Thank you.
Military science, science fiction podcast. Reaction to the system on fire. Military science.